It's about time I made this video. Part of the excitement when AEW first formed back in 2019 was the promise of seeing stars who we'd never seen before. It's hard to believe now, but the likes of Darby Allin, Orange Cassidy, and MJF had never wrestled on television before AEW's inception. Even names such as Kenny Omega and Hangman Page had never wrestled on primetime television before AEW was a thing. Sure, there were your Moxleys, your Codys, and your Jerichos, but for the most part, a large percentage of the roster were breaking into the mainstream wrestling scene all at once. It's something we'll most likely never see again, at least not in my lifetime. MJF has said this about the current locker room, but I think it fits the AEW locker room throughout the entirety of its existence. They are the land of the misfits. It's a group of wrestlers who were never supposed to make it, but they did. It's a part of what makes AEW special, an identity that one would argue they almost lost. But now more than ever, the locker room holds a chip on their shoulder with a point to prove. In this video, I'll be talking about the rise of one of AEW's most popular acts today, a pairing that came quite literally out of nowhere yet proved to be explosive. Two overlooked wrestlers who proved their worth with the smallest of chances. People who say AEW doesn't create stars aren't going to like this video, because this is the story of one of AEW's most popular tag teams. This is the story of the Acclaimed. I remember when I first found out that the Acclaimed was entirely an AEW creation, and more specifically a Tony Khan creation. My mind was blown. Max Caster and Anthony Bowens had their own separate journeys that saw them come up through the ranks in the New York tri-state area. In Max Caster's case, you'd be surprised to learn that he had the rapping gimmick as far back as 2018 during his run in CZW. Even all those years ago, he was writing entire full-length diss tracks for his opponents in a bid to stand out amongst all the talent on the independent scene. One might even remember Caster's small cameo on WWE TV during the awful Lashley Sister segment. Then you had Anthony Bowens, who also made stops at CZW and WWE amongst other promotions before finally getting a call to appear on AEW Dark. Of the two performers, Caster was the first to get the call from AEW, having his first match on AEW Dark in June 2020. Anthony Bowens had his first AEW match 3 months later in September 2020, also for the YouTube show AEW Dark. I think it's important to note that this was during the pandemic when Tony Khan was essentially keeping indie wrestlers afloat by booking countless names on dark cards that featured like 17 matches and lasted like 2 hours. Shout out to Tony Khan for that, by the way, but I'm also bringing this up because it meant that since more independent wrestlers were being brought in, it would make it harder to stand out in a bid to get that full-time AEW contract offer. For whatever reason, AEW just had an insanely good eye for talent during the pandemic. I mean, just look at the names that they signed in that era. So in hindsight, it's no surprise that higher-ups recognized that both Max Caster and Anthony Bowens had potential. Bowens and Caster would then be booked to team up for the very first time in their careers on an October 2020 episode of AEW Dark where they took on Best Friends. It's surreal to go back and watch this now, but Caster and Bowens make their entrance together without a tag team name, with Max Caster's solo theme, and with no fans in attendance, of course, due to the pandemic. A lot of elements here are still the same as they are today, such as Caster rapping during the entrance and Bowens reacting in great comedic fashion to his disses. Keep in mind that at this point, these two are still unsigned by AEW. Although they lost to Best Friends, Tony Khan loved what he saw as he reportedly offered Max Caster and Anthony Bowens contracts once they walked through the curtain. Bowens in particular was in negotiations with WWE after they had seen him on AEW Dark the weeks prior. Tony Khan made the pitch of making them a permanent tag team and even giving them their own name, the Acclaimed. Max Caster and Anthony Bowens could have only loved what they heard as they put pen to paper, officially signing 5-year deals with AEW, and the rest, as they say, is history. Anthony Bowens and Max Caster weren't your traditional AEW hires. They weren't established names like Omega or Moxley, they didn't really have cult followings like Eddie Kingston, and they weren't being touted as the most exciting talents on the indies like MJF or Darby Allin. But for whatever reason, Tony Khan saw something in them that no one else did. He envisioned them as a tag team, the Acclaimed, and one thing he knew is that it was going to take patience for them to become a TV-level act. I don't think Tony Khan, or any of us for that matter, expected the Acclaimed's meteoric rise. I use that term a lot, meteoric rise, but this time it's for real. As I said a bit earlier, the Acclaimed had their first ever match as a tag team in October 2020, and by the time fans returned in May 2021, a whole 7 months later, they were getting some of the loudest reactions on the entire show. But it wasn't always smooth sailing for the Acclaimed. Before they won fans over, they were despised. Anthony Bowens recently wrote a fantastic piece for the Players Tribune about his journey on coming out, and also about the Acclaimed's early days. It's a very powerful piece that I suggest any AEW fan or any fan of the Acclaimed check out if they haven't already. But basically, what Bowens said was that during the early days of the Acclaimed as a tag team, fans would demand they be removed from TV. In other words, people thought they were awful. I remember the first time I heard about the Acclaimed. I wasn't watching AEW Dark during the pandemic era, so I first heard of the now beloved tag team through Twitter. I saw a clip of them making their entrance with the whole Max Caster diss and Anthony Bowens facial expressions, and I thought it was hilarious. They won me over almost instantly. Caster and Bowens put in the work to win over fans. Only 2 weeks after signing with AEW, Caster had produced the now iconic Acclaimed entrance theme that we all know and love today. Bowens started coming out with a boombox to create better visual cohesion as a tag team, along with the duo starting to rock matching gear. Another thing Bowens said in his written piece for the Players Tribune was that the initial hate from fans allowed him to come up with the now well-known catchphrase of "Everyone loves the Acclaimed." Basically, they kept doing their thing, killing it in the process, and were eventually rewarded for it with appearances on Dynamite against the likes of SCU and the Young Bucks. These high-profile matches on Dynamite were the beginning of something special. No longer being relegated to YouTube and being promoted to primetime television was a huge step forward for the Acclaimed, and they made the most of the time they were given. Max Caster was always looking to push the envelope with his entrance rap disses, such as the time he told Eddie Kingston he looks like a box of Newports, or in the very same rap when he mentioned Jon Moxley's wife Renee Paquette in a very suggestive way. Anthony Bowens' reactions on the sideline each time made the whole bit funnier. And that was the thing, the Acclaimed were funny idiots. Sure, they were the bad guys, but we were all now looking forward to that siren hitting to hear what Max Caster was going to say next. The Acclaimed's time on Dark didn't last much longer because, as mentioned before, once crowds came back, they were immediately one of the most over acts on TV due to their personality alone. In an ever-growing roster, it became clear everyone now truly loved the Acclaimed. Pushing the limit in such a way can sometimes lead to controversy, and of course, it was only a matter of time before one of Max Caster's raps crossed the line. When that moment came, he was suspended for 2 months without pay. But perhaps more importantly, he was made to sit at home and think of ways in which he could become a better performer without having to go so far. Despite this small setback, the Acclaimed remained as beloved as ever, and Max Caster continued his disses towards his opponents during his entrance. The Acclaimed surpassed so many of the other tag teams in AEW due to their personality. Throughout 2021, they were still bad guys, but they were lovable bad guys. In early 2022, they formed a bond with the Gun Club, which saw the Acclaimed coin some of their more outlandish catchphrases of today. Outlandish, but brilliant, I must add. The Gun Club at this point were an act that a lot of people really didn't like, but somehow the Acclaimed made it work. Even when Anthony Bowens went down to injury, he still remained a part of the show while in a wheelchair. Max Caster continued to team with the Gun Club. All 5 men would make their entrance together, and every time it just felt like a party. Bowens would get the crowd to say "ass boys," and they also coined their now beloved "scissor me daddy ass" catchphrase along with the hand gestures during this time too. The crowds were loud every single week, and believe it or not, they were still all heels. But finally in July 2022, the Guns turned on the Acclaimed, officially cementing the Acclaimed as babyfaces for the very first time in their AEW careers. This is when the surge in popularity truly reached its zenith. After defeating the Guns in a dumpster match, the Acclaimed alongside Billy Gunn, who chose them over his own sons, began their pursuit of the AEW tag team titles. By this point, Caster's raps are getting bigger reactions than ever, like the time he name-dropped Vince McMahon. Bowens has found himself as the hype man of the group with the catchphrases, and Billy Gunn is the father that stepped up. The Acclaimed head into their AEW tag title match at All Out 2022 against Swerve in Our Glory, nuclear hot. This was the match where the narrative about the Acclaimed strictly being promo guys died a quick death. Prior to this match, no one really gave Caster or Bowens their flowers as in-ring performers, but on that night at All Out, they had the best match of the night, and the crowd was the loudest it was all night, hoping that they would get the win. Unfortunately, they didn't win it here. Had they won the titles, the match would have forever been remembered as an all-time AEW match. However, the Acclaimed did get the rematch against Swerve in Our Glory for the titles at Grand Slam a few weeks later, which was fitting considering both men call the surrounding area home. And so in front of nearly 14,000 people, the Acclaimed's hard work paid off as they defeated Swerve in Our Glory to become AEW Tag Team Champions for the very first time. Confetti, celebrations, and tears of joy. From performing in front of no fans on AEW Dark to tens of thousands of fans cheering on your first title win on the biggest Dynamite of the year. The Acclaimed instantly cemented themselves as AEW's biggest homegrown success. The party continued and the fans continued to back the stars they nurtured. Foam fingers and scissor form began to dominate AEW crowds. The catchphrases remained loud. The Acclaimed proved that with one chance, you can become one of the most popular and successful acts in the entire company. As is the case with many beloved acts in pro wrestling history, the money was in the chase for the gold. The Acclaimed's chase to winning the titles was special. The reign itself was what it was though. They defended against the likes of Swerve in Our Glory, FTR, and Team Jarrett. Personally, I expected the Acclaimed's run to be shorter than what it was. A renewed rivalry with the Guns saw the Acclaimed's title reign come to an end after only 5 months. Fun fact, I was at the show where the Acclaimed lost the titles. Shout out to my city, El Paso, for being one of the best wrestling crowds of the year, by the way. We need more AEW events here. Thanks, Tony Khan. Anyway, the question now was one of if the Acclaimed could stay as hot as they were without the titles. Although they laid low for a bit, the following pay-per-view saw the Acclaimed and Billy Gunn challenge the House of Black for the Trios titles. Coming up short twice for the Trios titles, Billy Gunn began to wonder if he really still had it in him to keep going. However, after some motivation from Caster and Bowens, Gunn would choose to give it one last try at AEW's biggest event ever, All In at Wembley Stadium. In front of one of the largest crowds you'll ever see, the Acclaimed proved that they were truly stars when they made their entrance. An entire Wembley Stadium shouted their catchphrases with them. Again, from AEW Dark with no fans to All In at Wembley Stadium with an insane crowd hanging on every word you say. There was no way the good guys were losing here, but it still made for a great moment when the Acclaimed and Billy Gunn defeated the House of Black for the Trios titles. The biggest scissoring party of all time commenced. This brings us to where we are today. The Acclaimed are now 2-time champions in AEW and still amongst the most popular wrestlers in the company. Obviously, momentum of the 2022 caliber which they had couldn't last forever. Despite a trios division that's currently on life support booking-wise, the Acclaimed continue to make the best with what they have. But within the past few weeks, we've finally seen them enter a story that they've long needed. A story where they've come to the aid of AEW World Champion MJF. Despite Max being reluctant to take the help, one can't deny that the moment he agrees to stand alongside the Acclaimed and Billy Gunn, the pop will be nuclear. In a way, this is reminiscent of Dark Order and Hangman at Fight for the Fallen 2021, which is why I think the Acclaimed and MJF could be special if done right. The Acclaimed should be an example to any wrestler out there that you can go from unknown to beloved almost overnight in wrestling. All credit to Max Caster and Anthony Bowens, who have become one of the most beloved acts in all of wrestling, to the point where even WWE commentary mentioned them at one point. Which brings me back to what I said in the beginning. This is why we need an AEW. Without them, we would have never gotten the Acclaimed. An alternative gives wrestlers more chances to do what Caster and Bowens did. From unknown to stars, from hated to beloved, from panned to critically acclaimed.